I think it's important to be a part of Seatrade because if you're going to be in the maritime industry, you want to be seen and represented and speak and be spoken to in that sense with the leaders of the community. And this is one of the few events that actually hosts the leadership of the entire maritime franchise. So that's a very good reason to want to be here. Historically, I think Seatrade has been one of the initial organizers of the exhibitions. I remember going and talking to the old school, the old guard in 1999 and 2000 about having an agenda and as part of a steering committee advice panel at those days. And I think it's grown from strength to strength, the last 2 years notwithstanding. But I think it has been able to establish itself as a venue for having the single largest exhibition. There are several conferences, and this is one of the leading conferences. And I think having the buy-in from the maritime authorities of the UAE and the FTA, as well as now the Ministry of Industries, this is a big energy and industries. This is a big collaboration. And hosting the Maritime Week and coming together with the events that they do, it's very exciting. I mean, the expo venue is just a bonus in terms of the whole connecting the future and connecting minds. Once you get here, it's great, and but it's a very good venue to have. In my opinion, the first lesson learned is that don't take anything for granted, ever. Whether it's your supply chain, whether it's going to work, whether it's having a job, I think it's very important to realize how finicky the future or fate can be. It has been so random. I remember being at a conference in London on the 4th of February 2020, and I think the word COVID was mentioned once in passing on the second day. Within a month of that, COVID was mentioned in every second sentence. So quickly, an event that one never ever thought about. You talk about a black swan. This was completely like a black hole in terms of where all the happiness just disappeared. And we went through, I think, a very difficult emotional, psychological, and obviously financial time as a global community. And the maritime industry being one of the biggest connectors of the global community, considering that 85 to 90% of everything that we see and touch and feel has been brought to us via the sea, you can't ignore that community. Add to that all the acute discomfort and the problems that the seafarers went through during this unappreciated, overworked, elongated, stays on board the vessel far beyond the original contracts. Even when they got off, they had 14 days in quarantine, 14 days coming on, 14 days going off. It's been a very torrid time. And I think the whole question of mental health has now arisen through the pandemic. So while there's a lot to learn about the finickiness of fate, I think there's a lot of good that's come out of it in terms of lessons learned. I think it's been a great stimulus towards the energy transition. I think it's been a great appreciation of what clean air means, blue skies, where smog has actually disappeared over some significant capitals, in the world. So you've seen, you've got to be clever enough to look for the positives as well. It's all very well to get overwhelmed with all of the negative stuff that happens, but I think you can find some positives in everything, and this is one of them. I think the definition of logistics and the way we deal with logistics is changing. I think there will be possibly a greater trend towards more regional trade. I think there will be a greater trend towards stocking as people find it more difficult to predict. I think the just-in-time inventory process has been severely hit in terms of the model. Just-in-time has worked when everything is just perfect. But if it's not just perfect, then just-in-time becomes a very expensive way to run your business because for 2 parts that are missing, 98 parts are just sitting there idle because you can't finish the job. So I think there will be difference in strategies in terms of manufacturing, in terms of the service backup requirements, the resources required to even deliver a service. So that's one aspect. I think the brick and mortar concept or just shopping generally itself is going to be obviously a big question mark, but the taking off of the online phenomena of Amazon and everything else. So I think there's a multitude of changes, and we're still in early days. We're still reacting. We're still digesting what's happened, and the recovery is far from complete. We've had so many stop-starts in terms of the recovery process. You think about the dynamics, and everybody's talking about cars and computers and not having enough chips, but there are only 2 major chip manufacturers in Korea. And what an industry-wide dependence on something that who would have thought that chip would be so bloody important. So all of a sudden now you've got to rethink, and I think maybe more people investing in chip factories, let's get into that business. It seems to be quite a little bit of a hold on it. So I think there'll be a lot of redefinition, a lot of boardroom conversations about strategy, about readjustment. And whether it's a new normal or just normal, I don't know. Every day is new. And I think prior historical sense of normalcy has probably changed forever. And maybe that's just another way of looking at it. And there is no new normal. Every day is new. And then you make that your normal, however it is, when you equalize on that basis. But I think a lot of people will have learned a lot of lessons. In my opinion, shipping has returned to normal in the sense that, there's been a huge recovery from where we were. Vessels are sailing. Crew members are disembarking. We have a lot smoother operation today. And yes, you get your variance and you get your setbacks, and it's 1 step forward and 2 steps backwards. But like I said, that's the new reality. Now, maybe you're going to be living with this for the next 5 years and having a new vaccine and a new booster every year, maybe every 6 months. So these are all the new aspects of the COVID-19 phenomena that we're yet to come to grips with. But in the meantime, kids go to school. Kids, or they don't go to school, but they get learning, through your various video interfaces. People go to work one way or the other, either by Zoom or by going to a brick and mortar establishment, or both. But business continues. Money gets earned. Look at the U.S. job market. It's booming. I was in the States this summer, and every second restaurant had a sign, "Help wanted." And here's a time when, these are the overworked, underpaid, people who just took them for granted. And today, the cock of the hoop, they're the ones who everybody wants. And they say, no, we're not coming for that price. Pay us more. I went to one restaurant where they were closed every Sunday. And then all of a sudden, fine. And then said, we're closing Mondays. So why are you closing 2 days a week? We can't get staff. Can you imagine closing a restaurant because you're so busy and you can't get staff, so you can't run? But that's the reality. So things have moved on, and I don't know whether this will be normal again, but this is the reality. This is today's reality. And it's just about how well we adjust to it. Stop complaining, stop whining, stop whinging. This is what it is. And make the best you can out of it. That's my advice. Well, I think the whole concept of the work week, I think the work impact, the work environment will possibly be one of the big takeaways. And the necessity of working in the way we did, the whole we work concept and the sharing a desk concept, I think these are going to take on a far greater significance. Not without a cost, mind you. I think the young people coming in, the interns and the freshers who come into the various offices have lost out so much on not being around the seniors just to be mentored. And not only in a formal business sense, but just in the corridor conversation, the 20 minutes before the board meeting starts, or before the departmental meeting starts, the 5 minutes before the meeting, or 10 minutes chit-chatting after a meeting. A guy can turn around to a colleague and say, I didn't understand that. What did he say? What did he mean? You can do that when you're sitting in a room. You can't do that with 300 people on a Teams call. So there's a lot of missing out. But the phenomena that this is the new reality is here to stay. So we are going to see big changes in that area. I mentioned shopping and the way we buy, the way we procure, the way we live our lives in terms of choices. I was looking, actually, being old school, I was looking for, isn't there a PDF, isn't there a schedule about what events? I said, no, it's all on the website. I said, but I wanted to see everything and then circle what I wanted to go to, like I've always done. It's gone. I've got to do it a different way. What the pandemic did was accelerate change. I don't think it induced change by itself. It just accelerated things that were happening. Again, energy transition, the whole discussion about, COP, I think 26 had a much greater impact because it was post-pandemic. Who remembers where the other COPs even were? But everybody was focused on Glasgow, because it became such a big issue. So I think the whole energy environment issue, whether it's greenhouse gases, whether it's carbon emissions, the alternate fuel discussion, all of these have gained more momentum. Not that they weren't happening, but the momentum has increased. And those, I think, are some of the positive aspects of the rapid rate of change with which we have to deal with our new realities. I think the biggest issue facing us is who controls the narrative. We talk about green, we talk about alternate energy, and we have to realize, and I think my ex-colleague and friend Rene Kofod Olsen mentioned this in one of his discussions, is it's only 9% is renewables. It's still a predominantly hydrocarbon industry. Let's take back the narrative, guys. It's oil and gas still is the name of the game. And there's several, BP might have talked about peak oil being in 2019, but the IEA and OPEC still talking about peak oil between 2030 and 2040. Thank God, because there's a little more hope for the oil and gas industry. And all of the oil and gas industry doesn't have to be dirty. It doesn't have to be bad. The cleaner ways of doing it, having carbon capture, the better emission standards, scrubbers and SO2 and everything else notwithstanding. So there's a lot of effort being done to do this in a more, moral, ethical, better way. And why not? Why not have these external influences coming in and to making sure that the industry actually performs better? We need that in all industries, whether it's the medical industry and people question ethics over there, and whether it's the oil and gas industry. So I think that these are some of the things that the industry is learning, and I think we're going to actually... The problem I see that with 5 or 6 years, since 2013-14, when the initial shock to the hydrocarbon industry happened and the oil price collapsed, there's been no significantly less and less reinvestment. Now, you cannot go around not investing in something and realizing that you've got a 6 to 12% deletion rate or depletion rate of your existing wells. So the amount of oil you've got is X, is depleting every year just because of attrition, and then you've got no new money being pumped in or not enough money being pumped in to find new resources. Well, fine, there'll come a day, but how much can Mr. Biden release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve? You need new oil. Even to fill that tank, you need more, or fill those caverns, you need more oil. So if you don't get enough oil today, I can very easily see oil hitting $100 a barrel. So E&P has got to continue. But boardrooms are in a dilemma. There's shareholder revolts. You've got Shell, you've had BP, you've had a bunch of people saying, hey, what are we doing? But at the same time, you have to face the reality that you will not have enough oil if you do not invest in E&P. So I think these are challenges that need to be faced, and I think people have got to de-emotionalize it, do a little bit more number crunching, look at the forecast. And Teslas are not replacing 50% of the fleet overnight. So there is a lot of work to be done on the current infrastructure that we have, and we've got to find ways of improving that and living with the reality that we've got 40% of oil will still be coming from hydrocarbons in 2040. So that's a big number. I think that's sort of got lost a little bit in this green wave that we're facing. I think one of the challenges is I don't think there's a universal strategy. I think the Europeans are going more towards finding carbon neutral ways of progressing, whereas the US companies are going more towards offsetting their carbon footprint by carbon capture. So you have some fundamental differences on how to approach this. And I think carbon capture and being carbon neutral, these are all very much evolving themes. And there is a bunch of intellectuals and a bunch of corporates who understand it, but there's a lot of fluff around it in the mind of the average person. So it hasn't yet come down to the regular cocktail circuit conversation yet. And I think that is going to take some time. And I think there's going to be a lot of David Attenborough type shows and a lot of talk shows and discussions. And And there needs to be a better understanding. And when it comes into the sitcom category of Friends or something like that, when it comes into that parlance where everybody's talking a little bit about it, and finally you get it after a while. I think that's a process, that socializing of what these terms mean, bringing it into everybody's language, is something that we need to look forward to. They want unanimity. The world hates uncertainty. It's not that the oil companies like $90 a barrel or $60 a barrel. They just don't like it going from 60 to 90 to 60 in 2 weeks. That level of uncertainty is very unsettling. It's unsettling for plans, it's unsettling for targets, business strategies, hiring strategies, retention strategies. So that uncertainty is what actually makes the markets difficult. And that reflects not only in the market, it reflects in your purchasing. It reflects in, should I buy the house this year or not? Should we buy a new car? All this issue making gets offset by this uncertainty. So the oil price fluctuations affects much more than just the oil industry. It affects all of us in all that we do, because a lot of us are interrelated without being necessarily part of the hydrocarbon footprint. And we need to take this holistic view. And to do that, you've got to understand it, get some level of standardization, get some level of certainty, be able to forecast the next 3 years, 5 years, hopefully, and at least have some unanimity on where the forecasts are. Today we don't know whether the Fed's going to raise interest rates or not. Is it inflation? Is it transitory, or now is it here to stay? These are all big gurus are saying it was transitory. And I say, well, maybe they're not. Maybe it's a little more. Maybe it's got a permanent residence rather than a transitory visa. So there will be some changes in the Fed's language going forward, and everybody reacts to a difference. Who knew? Containers from $7,000 to $70,000. It's been ridiculous prices in some cases, 10 times on some trades. So shortages that we've never heard of, never thought we'd ever hear of. So there've been a lot of surprises, and it'll take some getting used to. Well, I love going to the Maldives, and I won't be able to. Certainly my children won't be able to, or my grandkids won't be able to. That's for sure. And then that's a travesty. It's just you look at what's happening in Alaska with the glaciers falling down. You look at what's happening with Greenland. You're looking at what's happening with the Mount Everest and the Himalayas, and just the whole change, the climate change in itself, is such a huge consequence. So whether it's carbon capture or greenhouse gases together, or we just stop the methane coming from cows, which nobody talks about these days. I think it's become unfashionable. But the reality is, we've got to come to grips on this 1.5%, 1.5 degrees change. It's a very, very important target. And so COP26 was in some ways a cop-out as far as I'm concerned. It just didn't meet the objective of coming in with a hard party line. But at least the narrative is being discussed. It is being much more open. And the weaknesses are becoming more visible, and they're being talked about. And maybe that sets the agenda. But it's devastating if we don't come together on this. So I think it's very critical. Just one little thing on the Seatrade Maritime itself. I was a little disappointed, to be honest, coming from a very narrow perspective of the offshore support vessel space, that there wasn't enough of an agenda item in this year's Seatrade Maritime to cover the OSV sector. Now, I know there's going to be part of the Middle East Maritime as every other year, which is going to be held in Abu Dhabi as the work boats or the Middle East, which is dedicated to the offshore. But I think we do reserve at least an honorable mention in mainstream, especially in the UAE. We have 300 to 400 owners of ship owning companies. It's a very vibrant business. We're very involved in the delivery of oil from both Aramco and ADNOC and all of Qatar Gas and RasGas. So regionally, it's a very significant chunk of our economy. And I think that sector needs to be at least a little bit recognized, either by a panel discussion or some talk around the sector and what its recovery prospects are. And I would suggest that going forward, that even though they have a dedicated conference every other year, in the main conference, which is this one, and in Maritime Week, they have to play some role and be recognized in some manner. I think it's got to be a part of every maritime agenda. I'm not talking about disproportionately. I'm not saying it should get 50% coverage versus tankers getting 50%. No. Let's keep things in perspective. It is a relatively small sector. It is a niche sector, but it's an important sector. And there's a lot of hard work and effort being done in that sector. And there are a lot of hardships in that sector that are not recognized. Mobilizing across border during the times of COVID, for example, is a huge problem. And they're not quite as large. You can't go for a walk around the deck, on a smaller vessel. So you have different kinds of pressures, and whether it's from a mental health perspective, whether it's a seafarers perspective, whether it is the challenges of the flag regimes, there's a lot of agenda items that need recognition. And I would look at bodies like Seatrade, who have the ear of the maritime authorities, in the UAE. They have look at the representation from Saudi here. It's fantastic today. When you talk about all of these ports and Red Sea Gateway and Islamic Port and this, that, and the other, and if they had something to take away on the OSV side, what a big plus it would have been. So I think whether it's from an event perspective, whether it's an exhibitor perspective, there's so many OSV companies who are not exhibiting. I don't think they've been targeted. So I would suggest that it would be a good thing to include them in the exhibition side, in the conference as an agenda item side, and generally in all your publications, whether it's Coverage Cloud or whether it's in your Seatrade magazine or the weekly or the monthly magazines. I think it deserves a little bit more than just an honorable mention.